We will go to the final session, and I would like to invite Rudy and the Mitchell family members, and Makram, and then Nick and Makram. Yeah.
Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, feel free to come on up. It's really great to see so many of Professor Mitchell's students here today, and members of the larger Bay Area geotechnical community and those that have come in from other areas. This celebration of Jim's life and career has been a great and memorable event. The friendship and goodwill amongst everybody here is really, really nice to see, and I think it would have made Jim very, very happy. I think his spirit's here with us, and he'd be very happy to see the spirit and the friendship and the love here today. The sessions today have been outstanding, both as a testament to Jim's contributions to the geotechnical profession in so many areas, as we've seen, but also in hearing about where we're headed in the profession in each of the areas that were discussed. Our final session today is going to be a little bit different than the others. As you can see, we've set up a panel here, and where we're going to talk about Jim's influence outside of teaching and research related to geotechnical engineering. For the panel today, we have Jim's wife, Holly, who came from Massachusetts all the way across the country. So, Holly, thank you very much for being here. We have 3 of Jim's 5 children on the stage with us. First, Rick. You all met Rick this morning, and Rick, that was really a wonderful introduction to the meeting, so thank you. We have Jim. Jim is a Senior Vice President and Program Manager for AECOM in the transportation and planning sectors. And Jim, you, I understand, had quite the travel efforts to get here today. Jim is relocating from a project up in Washington down to Austin, Texas, the Austin Light Rail project you'll be leading. So you flew in yesterday from Austin, and you're flying out tomorrow to Washington, D.C. to pack up. And, well, thank you for taking the time to be here. We also have Don sitting next to Nick. Don has come the furthest of the Mitchell clan, all the way from Sweden, where he's a professor of human geography at the University of Uppsala. And I'm not sure I've pronounced that right. Is that close enough? Before moving to Sweden, you were professor and department chair at Syracuse University in the same field. And I understand in your background, you were a MacArthur Fellow, which is quite an accomplishment. Thank you for coming halfway around the world. We also have down on the end, Makram Jabber. Makram received his Ph.D. from Jim Mitchell in 1989, as we heard today, studying reinforced soil. He then, after graduation, worked at Geosyntec. We worked together for nearly 5 years. And he decided then to go off to Emory University to get a law degree. And today, he is a lawyer and partner at McGuireWoods in Washington, D.C. And I know you have some unique perspectives to add, Makram, so thank you for being here. And last, but certainly not least of our panelists is Nick Sitar. I think everybody here knows Nick. Nick's been on the faculty here, what, about 45 years? And you look the same. You look the same as the day you got here. Yeah, but for about the first 10, 12 years, Nick was on the faculty, the Geosystems faculty, with Jim. And you have some unique perspectives on Jim, looking at him as a co-faculty member. As a group, we developed some questions that will allow our panelists to talk about Jim's life and contributions outside of teaching and research in geotechnical engineering, as I've already said. I'll ask specific questions to specific panelists, and once a response is given, if other panelists want to add some color, add some stories, you're more than welcome to do that. If there's time at the end, we're going to open up the floor to everyone here if they want to share a memory about Jim or thought about Jim, we would love to hear that. So our hope is to make this a thoughtful, informative, and relaxed session to wrap up this special day. And we're going to start with Jim's academic and professional service contributions. And for that, Nick, I have the first question for you. Can you share with us some of the ways that Jim made contributions to the Berkeley Civil Engineering Department and campus while he was on the faculty here that go beyond teaching and research?
Well, let me start with his most important contribution as far as I'm concerned. He signed the letter hiring me as a department chair, and I still have that letter. On top of it, Jim and I, interestingly enough, shared the same birthday, 22 years apart, April 19th. And as I found out today, and I thought I heard it once before, we both started in chemistry and then changed our major to civil engineering, or in my case, geological engineering. So we had a lot in common. Of course, most of you knew him as your professor, as an instructor. I knew him as a colleague, and somewhat different relationship, but he was a great mentor to me as well. And we co-authored a paper, and we introduced the first course in environmental geotechnics, as far as I know, anywhere in the world. And we co-authored it, and then he skipped town, and I was stuck with it alone, and I really appreciate Catherine showing the outline for the course. And of course, I always assumed that everybody needed to know fundamentals of soil behavior. But coming back to Berkeley, so he's the department chair. Those of you who graduated from Berkeley know geotech is on 4th floor. Department chair's office on 7th floor. Just so you understand his priorities. He played squash against his students and drubbed them regularly, as we've already heard. But, coming ski season, he was hoofing it up the stairs to 7th floor. And so, keep in mind, I was 29 years old, okay? Everybody was really old. They were much younger than I am now, but they were really old. And here is Jim going up the stairs in October, and I'm going, what's up? And he says, well, first of all, I have a medical appointment, and I have to make sure my blood pressure is right. And second, the ski season is coming up, and I need to be in shape. And you've seen the picture on skis in there. So he had his priorities. Now, in terms of his service, department chair at Berkeley is more, it's not exactly telling individuals what to do. It's more encouraging and making sure they prosper. And a lot of it is promoting them, making sure that they get their regular merits and whatever else. So it's a quite heavy-duty assignment. You write a lot of memos. And Jim was extremely good at writing those, and people got promoted. But on top of it, he served a number of very important committees. And Berkeley, rightly or wrongly, is known for its committees, but what it really is the academic senate governance, okay? We actually have a very strong academic senate governance, and Jim was involved in it, and probably his most important contribution, that there are many, was he served as a chair of the Graduate Council at Berkeley campus, which regulates all aspects of graduate student life on Berkeley campus. And in fact, it's not very well-known secret that the graduate dean actually reports, that's the only committee where a member of the administration reports to an academic committee. And the graduate dean actually reports to the graduate council. So it's a very important committee. And then eventually he chairs the system-wide. So we have the individual campuses, and then we have a system-wide governance, and he was part of that. And the fact is, as all of you who spoke here mentioned, you didn't notice that he was doing all of this stuff all the time. He was so incredibly organized that you didn't notice what he was doing, except those of us who were inside could see all the things he was carrying, and it seemed so easy. I told last night at the dinner to those of you, so I looked at him because we had adjacent offices, and I thought, well, I should really follow his example, being as efficient. I lasted about 2 weeks before I decided, no, I was not in his mold. He was really amazing what he did for his colleagues in terms of, and of course he got the Outstanding Teaching Award, which is, on a campus like this, which is known for quality teaching, that's a really amazing thing. So he really had a lot of influence on academic life within the university. And of course, he served on review panels for other institutions and so on. That all came because of his willingness to always serve. The one thing I'd like to correct was the business about him always going home at 6 o'clock. That may have been when the children were young. But I knew him also as a sax player. And at the time I knew him, the saxophone the band practices were at 6 o'clock or 6:30 on Tuesdays. And so every Tuesday I had dinner with him at the diner, at the Chinese diner on Euclid. And that was a wonderful opportunity to just talk about anything. So, he had many different dimensions, and his service to the university was unsurpassed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. I'm mostly going to be asking questions, but I do want to build on what Nick just said and extend it to service to the profession more broadly. Jim was extremely generous in promoting the accomplishments. Jim was also extremely generous in service to the profession. He made enormous contributions in a leadership and administrative and governance way to the American Society of Civil Engineers, the International Society of Soil Mechanics and Foundation Engineering, the National Academy of Engineering, the National Research Council, and others. For example, with ASCE, he served as the chairman of the executive committee of the old Geotechnical Engineering Division back in the day, and he chaired 3 other geotechnical engineering committees and served on a total of 11 ASCE committees during his career. Also contributed mightily to ASCE in the review of levees and levee failures after Hurricane Katrina. For ISSMGE, he was the vice president for North America, and he served on other committees as well. For the National Academy of Engineering, he served on 6 different committees, including the all-important peer committee, which is the committee that recommends and evaluates potential nominees for induction into the academy. And he served on 11 National Research Council committees and panels. That's a very large number, and some of those in chairmanship positions. And one of the things I found really amazing about Jim was into his late 80s, he was serving on the NRC Committee on Geological and Geotechnical Engineering. I think he must have been 88 or 89 years old, and he was extremely active with that. That's, you talk about a unicorn, that's really pretty amazing. Another aspect related to this is his generosity in helping others in the profession, and that's been alluded to, I think, several times today. From where I sit, I had the chance to watch Jim contribute to ASCE committees and NAE membership. I had a chance to look behind the curtain, if you will, because I was serving on some of those committees. And I can tell you, there was no one in our profession that was more proactive in nominating people and writing recommendations for awards with ASCE or for membership in the National Academy of Engineering. Jim was always willing to become engaged, always willing to write a superb nomination or a letter of recommendation. He was extremely generous with his time, and you pile it on top of, Nick, what you described about all his administrative duties, all his teaching, his 400 publications, and everything else, and you get a sense of that. And he could have easily said, no, I'm too important, I have too much going on to do all these things for colleagues. But he did it for so many people, and I think there are probably people in this audience who know they did it for you. He was also very generous in accepting obligations that we would put on him to participate in a conference or in a panel or do something else. I know in 1990, I was absolutely thrilled when I was asked to organize a session at an ASCE convention, in fact, in San Francisco, on waste containment systems. And I approached some speakers, and they all agreed. And the last one I approached with trepidation was Jim. And I said, Jim, would you be willing to write a paper for this symposium? And he agreed to. And I was thrilled to death, and it was so generous of him. Makram, you co-authored that paper with him, if you remember. And I have something to say about this later. Okay. And Chris, I'm not sure where you are, but I heard the same thing, and him getting involved in an early meeting. And I think from Albert, I heard the same thing. So he was very generous in that regard, one of the most generous I've seen in the profession. Well, let's move on. We're going to go to the Mitchell family for a few questions. And I have some specific questions, but I'm going to start with a few general questions. And these are for Rick, Jim, and Don. We all know about Professor Mitchell. We heard a lot about that today. But tell us a little bit about Jim the dad. How was he involved in your lives? What was he like at home? What was it like to have Jim the dad as a dad?
I spoke about that this morning, so I'm going to defer to my brothers here. I'll let Jimmy go first.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Well, for me, it was interesting because, A, I have the same name with the exception of the middle initial. But growing up, I was young Jim. Then it was Big Jim or Little Jim, as people called. Then it was Old Jim or Young Jim. Then it was JW, and you knew that you were okay unless your mother or father used your middle name. But growing up, I think what people have said about making time, he did make time. He made time for each one of me and my siblings, whether it was in scouting, whether it was in sports, whether it was in just one-on-one time. And so I think that's really important. And again, the world changed while we were growing up. The PC came in, and next thing you know, people are glued to their phones. And I can, even as recently as before my father passed away, helping my father understand an Android phone. Now, you have to understand, I'm an Apple person. So then I have to call my youngest son, who is an Android person, or you find the 12-year-old and say, program the remote, right? So, but no, I think all in all, what's been said really transcends who he was. Whether you had an issue, whether you needed advice, you could either go to my father, you could go to my mother. But one of the things that I did learn was fiscal responsibility from my father. My mother and father had a saying that they had the Friendly Home Loan Society. And they would then help teach us about the value of and responsibility. So let's say you're 16 years old, you want to get a car. Well, Dad said you had to save at least a third of the value of the car, or half the value, and then you could borrow, he would then match a third, and you could borrow a third, and there were payment terms that you had to adhere to. Or, I think as Donald knows, the car can get repossessed. But that is a life lesson about responsibility that I've taken from my mother and father and now transferred down to my 3 boys that are all grown, and they're transferring it down to their kids. And so these are some of the life lessons that I think nowadays some of the younger generations don't even understand. And so for that, I'm really, really grateful.
The trick, the trick with Dad was you had to be able to predict some of these things. And so if you were going to get the car repossessed, you had to time it so it happened within not more than 300 or 400 miles of the transmission going out. What we've been hearing today is very much who he was. And in some ways, that's a very daunting person to grow up with. He was modest, he was generous, he was all of those things, but we also knew very well what his accomplishments were. And we knew how hard he worked for them. As Rick said this morning, after the cocktail, I think it was as often a martini as it was a gin and tonic, but after the cocktail, a glass of wine with dinner and a cup of coffee, after dinner. He would retreat to his study with his yellow pad and whatever else he did in there. The door was open, but stepping across that threshold was sometimes scary. And so he was all of those things, but we also saw how hard he worked at doing what he did. Those 400 papers didn't come out of thin air, of course, nor any of the other things that he did. And that was something that I think for all of us became a real model. And I'll say a little bit more about that a little later on.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Don. Holly, I have a question for you. When you and Jim got married, there was a uniting of the Mitchell and Taylor families. Can you tell us a little about becoming a part of the Mitchell family?
Is it on? Yeah. Hello. First, I want to say thank you for this opportunity, which is welcome, but also extremely daunting. I've never spoken to more than about 12 people at once. So I had to gather my thoughts and write them down so that I wouldn't miss something or misspeak. So forgive me if sometimes I'm reading, but it's such a great opportunity to share some of this with you. So I appreciate your indulgence in this. There was the meeting, and then there was the becoming. So the meeting happened on March 18th, 2006. It didn't take long before I learned about Jim's family, because we did hit it off right away. He called me within a few days of the first time we'd met and arranged another occasion for us to do something together. But I wrote down all the families and family names and drew a tree so I would understand what was going on. The first Mitchell I met was Jim's son, Christopher, who was then a junior at Virginia Tech, so that was easy. He gladly came over for dinner and hit it off with him, too. In fact, Jim said, I can't get him to talk like that. So I guess we hit it off enough so that it was several very fun occasions with Christopher. Then I met Laurie. Jim's daughter, Laurie, came for the 4th of July, and I got to meet her. After that, Rick, in October, I think it was very early October, you came and we went and had Sunday lunch at Chateau Morissette.
I just want to interject that we actually met in a grocery store the day before.
Did we?
Yeah, and I hadn't met you, and I think afterwards my dad said, well, that was a little awkward.
Oh, for him, I take it.
Yes.
Okay. And finally, then at Thanksgiving time, I was invited to come up to Natick, Massachusetts, and have Thanksgiving with quite a few Mitchells at the home of Jim and his wife, Connie. But Don and Susan were there visiting. Don had his birthday while we were there. I remember I gave you a card that sang, celebration time, come on. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. And then it was only David I hadn't met. But the whole family was coming for Christmas that year in Blacksburg. I was going away. So a bunch of them stayed in my house, and David arrived just before I left. So by the time Christmas came in 2006, I had met them all, at least that generation, but not all their spouses. Everyone was very welcoming. While there for Thanksgiving, I met Jim's brother-in-law, Bunny's brother, Red Williams, and some of the Williams clan on that occasion too. And they were all, I was having a ball. I loved them all. And in that time, between March and Christmas, Jim and I became really good friends. Such good friends. We could talk about anything. It was great. But it wasn't until I was away for Christmas that I really realized how I felt about him. I was sort of fighting it. So when I came back, that was the beginning of the becoming. And we were like a couple of giddy teenagers at first, full of joy and anticipation. I still have a copy of his message to his kids announcing what was happening. It was entitled, "What Do You Tell Your Kids?" And I'd love to read you just the end of it, because it just says things about the kind of person you already know he was. He says, "There are all sorts of things to be decided and worked out, for which we don't yet have the answers, relating to whether there will be a wedding, and if so, when and where we will live, the usual and probably some unusual legal details, etc. The answers will come. For now, we're simply enjoying the moment." There you have it. I know that you all will welcome Holly into the family as much as she is looking forward to being part of it. Parenthesis, she thinks all of you are really great. End parenthesis. And he ends it, with deep love for each of you. Nobody could be blessed with a better family than I am. So at that time, I'll just finish by saying that at that time, the family numbered 20, and they were all there for Christmas that year in 2006. There was Jim, there were his 5 married children, that makes 10, and there were 9 grandchildren. In addition, once we were married, my 2 daughters, Carrie and Sarah, plus my grandson, Sam, who came along in 2011, have also been welcomed and embraced by the Mitchells, much to our delight. It is an honor and a joy to be part of this remarkable family.
Thank you, Holly. But you know, you're not off the hook. I have a technical question for you. I need to ask you, how much geotechnical engineering did you learn during your years married to Jim?
Okay, keep the glasses on, keep the microphone. Is it on?
It should be on.
Okay. Okay. As I began to understand who Jim was as an academic and how widely he was appreciated, I wanted to know more about his field. Jim was a great teacher, as I know from my own experience, though it was very different from yours. He had a wonderful ability to explain things in ways that made sense to someone with no engineering background. I heard as many of his lectures and presentations as possible. I traveled when it was possible. I'm sure I've heard presentations by quite a few of you, including today. My comprehension of these was pretty good until the graphs appeared. And it went further downhill if a formula appeared. But I never gave up. Thanks to Jim, I expanded my vocabulary to include terms such as liquefaction, induced seismicity, slope stability, cone penetration test, soil compaction, creep, I love that one, fines, soil stabilization, and concrete boats. I also learned not to say dirt, but that's been mentioned already today. In the first 10 years or so of our marriage, Jim was actively engaged in quite a few projects, always concurrently with a bunch of others, as well as attending conferences and traveling to give talks. I traveled with him when it made sense to do so. Trips to Brazil, Australia, Taiwan, China, and Hong Kong greatly expanded my world. We were at GeoCongress 2008, 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2019. I enjoyed all of this greatly, and thanks to Jim, I met many bright and congenial people and developed a genuine admiration for Jim's chosen field and the professionals who teach and work in it, many of whom I count as friends today.
Thank you, Holly. I don't want to throw you off, but I have an impromptu question. Was there any project that you can recall where Jim would just come home for dinner and be disgusted or frustrated, like, this is the worst project, or this is giving me more headaches, or I can't believe who I'm working with?
You don't want to hear the answer to that. Because it was the book.
Well, that actually, since you brought it up, that's my next question. And we heard today about some of the challenges of the fourth edition, and so what was it like for you living through
Through the book?
Through the fourth edition?
It was actually it was a positive thing. It sounded good to say that what I said, but it was overall it was a very positive experience. Jim didn't like having nothing to do, and by the time he was 90 when we moved to Massachusetts, and having nothing to do up there would have been a really bad thing. So the book was a great thing. We downsized in 2020, moving to a small house in a retirement community in South Hadley, Mass. He had pretty much retired until the publisher asked for a fourth edition of the book, and that began this wonderful collaboration with Jim, Kenichi, and Catherine. He spent many hours, some of them frustrated ones, working on the new edition, but I know he was he was happy doing it. Definitely, no matter what happened. The three of them would meet online. You've seen that already with the times, the different times they had to get each. Sometimes these meetings were later and affected our dining plans, but it was never really a problem. In June 2022, Kenichi and Catherine came and spent a couple of nights so that the three of them could work together in person, and that's the picture you saw that Catherine had. Thank you for that, Catherine. But as I already said, Jim was never comfortable having nothing to do. Throughout our life together, if there was something to be done or a problem to be solved, he worked on it immediately if he could. Or if it required some reflection, he would reflect. But it wouldn't be too long before he came up with an, parenthesis, almost always workable plan or solution. I loved the fact that after our move to South Hadley, Jim, then in his 90s, had a project that engaged and challenged him. It was my honor and pleasure to support and help him in any way I could. Thank you, Catherine and Kenichi, for all your hard work and for being such good friends to us both.
Hear, hear. Jim, staying with geotechnical engineering, is it true that whenever the Mitchells had a road trip for vacations or for other reasons, your dad would stop at the major dams in the States to get photos and information for future lectures? Did he drag you all around?
Not only did he drag us around California, we would plan trips to go visit the family on the East Coast. And instead of getting on Interstate 80 and taking it straight across and getting it done in 3-4 days, we went like this. But it's not fair just to say it was Dad. It was also Mom, to make sure that we saw all the national parks that we could see. But many of the dams that probably you all saw in class, we got to see up close and personal. But yes, we would, if there was an Army Corps of Engineer dam nearby, we stopped. And a lot of times it was, whether it was for a break or lunch or something like that. But Dad would go, and this is now back in the days when you had a Rand McNally map, not Google Maps or anything like this. And so there would be the big, book of maps. There would be the triptych that they got from AAA. So now I'm dating myself because there could be some people don't even know what a triptych is. But that's how you got across the country back before Google Maps came into existence. But yes, Rudy, it is very much what we did when we traveled.
That's great. Don, let's move on to music. I think most of us know about your dad's saxophone playing. Tell us about it from your perspective. What do you remember from childhood, and did he encourage his 5 children to get involved in music? And I think from a photo we saw today, the answer was yes. It looked like an entire band.
Yeah, we did have an entire band. I'm not sure the neighbors appreciated it, though. No, both of our parents encouraged music, both playing and learning about it and listening to it and going to concerts and following our interests and all those sorts of things. In the prime of his career, Dad didn't practice very much. He was there with his yellow pads in the evening rather than the saxophone. And so he didn't practice much, but he did keep playing through the whole thing. And so when I was in junior high school and high school, there was a community band in Moraga that practiced at our high school. And he would come and play with that. You know, there's a bunch of 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old, mostly, kind of crazily hormonal boys and a couple of girls. And then this guy in his, what was he then, late 40s, right? Older than the band instructor from the high school, but he thoroughly enjoyed it. He would play with us. He would gently tutor the other people in the woodwind sections. He'd try and ignore us in the brass section because we were always screwing around and so forth. But he thoroughly enjoyed playing all the time. And then I think particularly after he moved to Virginia, he started playing a lot. He would go to summer band camps, jazz camps in Vermont. Did this for a number of years in a row. And for a week or 2 weeks, I've forgotten how long it was, we went to a couple of concerts that they put on. And it was like a high point of his year. He would mostly leave behind his other work, and he would be around other musicians, and he would just play and enjoy that thoroughly. And it was infectious. And I think when we were kids, it was infectious. Some of us more than others. David was never so keen on being a musician, I think. It was kind of begrudging, though. Wouldn't you agree? But he would encourage us. He would sometimes scold us if we hadn't been practicing, although he left that more to our mother than him doing that. And if we're interested, really interested, like Rick and I were, then he really found ways to encourage our playing and supporting it, even to the point of occasionally coming home early from work to go to a band concert.
That's great. That's great.
I have to add one thing. His sax playing had important influence on me as well. When I joined the faculty, I was obviously much junior than everybody else. So whenever there was a weekend meeting to be planned, everybody senior looked at their black book and said, that Saturday doesn't work, this Saturday doesn't work. Eventually they agreed on a Saturday. And I had a sailboat, as many of you know, and I raced it. And I would look at my calendar, and there was a sailing race. But I thought, these guys are really important. They're doing important stuff. I can't say I'm sailing, you know. So I canceled the sailing, called my crew, and whatever. And that went on for a bit. And then one time we go around the table, and Jim looks at his black book, and he says, I'm playing a wedding in Sonoma. And what do you mean you're playing? Oh, I play sax in a band, and we have a gig in Sonoma. That was liberating, because after that, I had a sailing race. I just say, sorry, guys, I'm busy. So his music was very instrumental in freeing me to pursue my passion.
That's great, Nick. Holly, wasn't your and Jim's mutual interest in music one of the things that brought you together when you first met? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can, as long as you'll allow me to lead us there by saying some of the other things that also contributed.
Yes, yes.
But it's not long. I think I would say that what brought us together when we first met was the ease with which we were able to converse. And you can imagine that because you know what he was like and how much he respected and cared about other people. There was an instant connection that arose more from who we were than from any specific common interest. We were on the same wavelength from the first moments, but then there were some coincidental connections that also we found sort of amazing. We both loved visiting Maine. We were both born in New England. Jim's late wife, Bunny, and my mother were both graduates of Mount Holyoke College, which is one of the reasons we were attracted to South Hadley, where we went to live. And Jim remembered driving there from RPI to visit Bunny and go to dances, although when I asked him more about it, he claimed not to remember. Jim got his Ph.D. at MIT, and so did my father, Randall Robertson, who was a physicist. My father became the first dean of research at Virginia Tech in 1970 after leaving the National Science Foundation, where he was associate director for research and was responsible for signing off on the grants. He went to Virginia Tech to help him to get grants because he was originally from Virginia. So that was a shared connection. We both had a real shared connection with Virginia Tech, even though I had never gone there and had never lived in Blacksburg until I moved there much later in life. So the musical connection, that was soon identified, and it provided us with many happy hours. I'm a choral singer and play keyboards, both piano and organ, where he was a sax player, at the time playing in two bands, the Blacksburg Community Band, which played a variety of stuff, and a really good swing band called the Old Pros, which he loved. He joined it, I think as soon as they moved to Blacksburg, he joined it, and he was still in it right up until we left. And I always went to hear him play. I know he immensely enjoyed his years in the it was a swing band, wasn't it, here at Cal? There was a band he was in here. Anyway, he loved that as well, and he wasn't going to give that up. We did play a number or two together several times, including All the Things You Are at our wedding reception. We kicked off the keyboard player from the combo and the sax player, and we did that number for the guests, which was really fun. But mainly we supported and enjoyed each other's musical endeavors. It was a shock the first time I saw the charts. That's what swing band players call their sheet music. First time I saw the charts, I can play by ear and I can sight read, and I couldn't play this chart. So they're just so different from a traditional musical score that if I wanted to play something with him, I had to rewrite it in musical language I could understand. And I'd just like to add, not necessarily related to music, that from the start we were amused by the same things, and our life together was full of laughter, including quite a bit of silliness, the sort of thing that keeps you young.
Wow, thank you, Holly. I didn't realize all the intersections of your interests in family and history and everything. That's neat.
It was.
Rick, you talked about your dad as a Boy Scout leader this morning. I actually have a question for Jim on that. I heard that your dad taught you scouts about how to fish for trout at something called ice camp.
Well, he actually taught us to fish at Echo Lake up off of US 50. My parents would get a cabin, or we'd use the Moffat's cabin, and we'd walk across this trestle that overlooked the highway below. But yes, before you could walk across the trestle, you had to learn how to bait the hook, take the fish off, put the fish on the stringer, clean the fish before you could bring it back to mom, who that was either dinner or breakfast in the morning. But that then transcended into scouts as well. So the reference to ice camp, there's really two references there. When we were on sabbatical leave in Massachusetts, in Lincoln, Mass. in 73, 74, Don and I were in scouts there as well, and they did a winter camp out in the snow, everything like that. And I think Dad went with us on the first one, and he liked it so much that when we came back to Moraga, went back to the troop we were in, we started doing that, and that's where the term, the ice camp, but the ice camp was actually in August. Up in the Sierras, and I think David was there with us, and it was Don and I, and it was so cold that the first day we're there, the scout leader said, well, we have to do the swim test. It's probably about 35 degrees out in August. And off we go into the lake to swim, to make sure we could swim the half mile or whatever we had to do in order to swim. Well, on Tuesday, it was so cold, somebody went down to the local store, because again, this is all pre-cell phones, called back to Moraga and said, everybody needs their winter gear. And they loaded up a pickup truck with all the extra sleeping bags, the extra down jackets, and everything like that, except Dad didn't need one. He had hauled, and there was one of the pictures you saw, he had towed the tent trailer up. So he was sleeping in the tent trailer while we were freezing. And it quickly became off limits. It was the leader's tent trailer. But yes, we've had a lot of fun on scouting and the camping, and I think it's something that at least I've done with my boys, and now they're doing it with their children, is teaching their children how to camp. And it all goes back to, it was almost like a rite of passage when you were younger, Dad, and we were at Echo Lake. There was an overnight that Dad would take you on, and we'd hike up, what was it, Aloha Lake? Tamarack. So it was, I don't know what, 2 miles further up or something like that. Steep, though. It was steep, but that was one of the things that we got to do. Why Mom might have had the rest of the clan back at the camp or the cabin. But so yes, camping was big to the Mitchell family, and we owe it to my mom and dad.
I can't help but wonder if there were any adult beverages in that leadership trailer.
On advice of counsel.
So
wait, let me just add something here. We've heard how upright and proper and ethical Dad always was, and yet somehow in a wilderness camp where no radios were allowed and so forth, somehow on August 9th, 1974, he knew that Richard Nixon had resigned. And soon enough, his radio came out so we could all learn about what had really happened.
those are called executive privileges.
Or as you say, rank has its privileges.
Yeah. So Don, something I didn't know but learned about as we prepared for this session is that your father was a bit of a handyman around the house, albeit I understand also an imperfect one. What were some of his noteworthy projects, good or bad, and what role did your mother have in designing these projects or laying them out for your dad?
Yes, you saw a couple pictures in Rick's presentation of all of us up on a roof with no safety equipment, by the way, painting, and the shed that was down below there. He and friends, and you may have been involved. I'm not sure. Built it. I was too young, and there was we had a great big sandbox in the backyard that he built and that the cats loved. And that my mother hated because we would come in with, the cats used the sandbox, and so you can imagine what we came in with. And so he'd do all those sorts of things, but he did quite a bit around the house. We had the upper floor of the house is this kind of two-story New England-style house that had one very, very big room in it, where at least 3 of us boys slept for a while, and he built a wall in the middle of it to make a room for my sister Laurie, and then I think only 2 of us boys had to share the other bit. But he also then on the wall built a fold-down model railroad set that was really quite impressive, actually, that we could use in built-in cabinetry and all of that. And most of the time it worked fairly well, but not always. The most famous episode, I imagine, was, well, he would do the wallpapering for all the rooms. So it was an enormously frustrating job, and it's very clear because he didn't swear a lot, but when he was doing the wallpaper, he swore a lot. And it was very difficult. Mom would be helping him unless she just had to get out of the way. And he'd do all of a sudden, he worked very hard on Laurie's room, finally gets it all perfect. There's not a wrinkle. It's beautifully set up. The patterns all match. The only problem is it's upside down. And it stayed upside down. It was never corrected. If he had been smart, he would have just painted over it, and then, just instead of even having a painted room. But what he eventually excelled at, I think, and this is where Mom actually was also quite helpful, is less in the construction himself, and he became a very, very good general contractor. I mean, you saw us all up there on the roof. And he got very good at figuring out, how to organize the division of labor and who was going to do which bit of it and so forth, and which pieces. And then he could go back to his study with his yellow pads, and eventually the walls would get painted. Very few of us actually fell off that roof. Later, when we were teenagers, we learned to jump off of it because that's how we'd escape from the house in the middle of the night when they thought we were still there asleep. But yeah, he became a very, very good, I think, general contractor in figuring out how to delegate jobs to all of us. And then to really, really learn how to hold back and not criticize us as much as he really wanted to in the job that we had done.
That's true. That's good. So, Makram, you think you're safe down at the end there, but you're not safe. I've got a couple of questions for you. As I already described, you did your Ph.D. under Jim and then worked at Geosyntec, and then you became a lawyer. What is Jim's continuing influence on you in your career as an attorney? Once you became an attorney, did you kind of forget about geotechnical engineering or Jim, or has it remained a presence?
I largely forgot about geotechnical engineering, but not about Jim. I'd say Jim had a profound influence on my personal as well as professional life, both in geotechnical engineering for a little while. I mean, I did not go straight to law school. I did work with you for 5 years, and law. First, as we've all heard all day today, it's clear that Jim had an influence on his PhD students that really goes beyond geotechnical engineering. And the warm embrace that he and Bunny gave all of us here at Berkeley, and I suspect he and Holly gave at Virginia Tech, especially the international students, was really kind of very, very reassuring and a great thing. And the example he set for us in terms of work-life balance, I think, is remarkable, given just what kind of person he is and what he did in his life and how busy he was. His continuous influence on me professionally is not about the nitty-gritty of geotechnical engineering, obviously, because as I said, even though when I went to law school, I thought I would work in waste most of the time, I ended up becoming an air lawyer and not doing much with waste during my career. But really, I mean, and of course, I followed in his footsteps when I was a geotechnical engineer, but that was kind of the first 5 years, as you all have. But it was really in the approach and attitude that to his work that he had. I think we can all, extol his organization and attitude to his work and work ethic. It rubbed on all of us, I think, and it rubbed on me too. But a very practical aspect that really helped me a lot in my work as a lawyer was really his insistence on good writing. When I came, now of course you had a role to play in that too, Rudy, but we'll get to that. I was not exactly the best English writer when I came to the United States. And frankly, many engineers that are originally from the United States are not very good writers generally. That's the stereotype anyway. But not Jim's students. We all had to kind of get in shape on that front. And after a couple of papers and a thesis with him, I was, I think, a decent writer. Even if every memo I ever wrote or report I ever wrote at Geosyntec came back read after every round of Rudy's review. And the definition of a infinite loop is Rudy reviewing himself. So on that, I kind of, I had already written this before you mentioned it. I didn't even remember what this paper was about that I wrote with Jim the second year, or maybe the third year I was with Geosyntec. I don't remember anything about it or where it was or what it was about. Thank you for reminding me about that. But Rudy really wanted Jim to write a paper, and I think the way he convinced him to do it, because I guess it must be that Jim was very busy that time, was to name me as a volunteer to work with Mitchell, which means writing most of the paper, at least the first draft of it. And I wrote it and sent it to Jim, and it came back read, and we went through a couple of iterations, and it was less read as it came back. But then for some reason, Rudy decided that he was going to review the paper. And I don't think he knew that Jim had already kind of had his contribution there. So he took the paper and he gave it back to me, and it was red. I mean, like arrows going, it was completely red. He bled all over it. And I was pissed off, I'll tell you the truth. And I'm like, he's correcting Jim Mitchell. I mean, come on. So I sent it to Jim. I faxed it to Jim. This was the fax days. And I said, look, I'm not going to even look at this. It's up to you. I figured he'd get pissed off too. And I think he might have been a little bit. I don't know that for sure, but he didn't he didn't respond to me for a couple of days. And then finally he responded to me. And he said, Mac, he called me Mac. I understand that you were pissed off. And, frankly, I was a little bit too. Because I looked at Rudy's comments, and some of them are just editorial and they did not need it. But then I looked at the rest of them, and they're pretty good. And we really should make the paper good. We should not say no to good comments. So he made me do all the pages.
That just shows what an open mind he had.
He really did. It's amazing.
So I have a follow-up question, Makram. What was Jim's reaction when you told him that you had decided to leave geotechnical engineering and go to law school?
Yeah, I called Jim, and I pretty much had decided to go to law school. So I wasn't, asking him to kind of bless it or anything like this. I just kind of wanted to tell him and see what he would say. And, and he was my mentor, like a lot of other people here, so it was important. And I guess you could say that there was a little bit of an awkward silence at the beginning. I could tell that I'm not perplexed. I don't know that he was necessarily disappointed or anything like this. And if he was disappointed, he didn't let on. Nor did he make any lawyer jokes, by the way. He said, at the end, when he broke his silence, he said, Mac, good for you. You'll make a good one. You were always a good advocate and persistent also. You pestered me so much when Salah Sadeh applied to Cal that I ended up telling you early that we accepted him just to get you off my back.
So I have one more follow-up question. So as an environmental attorney, you'll retain technical experts to help you understand a case or review another report and things like that. Did you ever try to retain Jim for that, or did you ever see him in a role as an expert on a case?
Not a lot, because I ended up not doing a lot of geotechnical engineering, but I did a little bit, and I saw him in action too. Let me start with kind of the saw him in action. Even when I was an engineer with you, Rudy, the Hardage case was going on, the big Superfund case in Oklahoma that was one of the bigger decisions in this field of environmental law, and he was an expert on it at the time. And I saw him from geotechnical, and it was kind of like he was like the revered expert by everybody in the engineering area. And then I saw him also from the law side, because when I went to Hansen and Williams at the time during the summer of my second year, they were also handling the case, or at least for one of the PRPs, because that's one of those like crazy cases with 200 PRPs type of thing. And I think he had the same reverence from the lawyers. And one thing I remember them telling me is that he's like the dream expert. Not just because of his background and his knowledge, but because he's so disciplined that they only had to tell him once, don't tell the other lawyer too much, answer the question only and stop. And he did it to perfection. So he was a very good one. I tried one time to hire him, but he was too busy and couldn't do that. And then, as I said, I ended up doing mostly air. Very recently, 5 years ago, I was working on a combustion coal residuals case, CCR case. I kind of was helping out a little bit because they knew I had a geotechnical background and they needed somebody to kind of get the experts for them. It was at the end of his kind of career at Virginia Tech, so he didn't want to do it, but he got me in contact with Craig Benson, and that was kind of actually a pretty fun experience with Craig. Yeah, that's what I would say about it.
And he, of course, did a lot of consulting, and Rick, you alluded to that this morning. Is there a consulting project with your dad that really stands out in your mind?
Probably maybe the very first one after I was done at UC Berkeley, when he brought me on to the consulting panel for the OII landfill. He didn't have to do that. I was batting way above my weight on that panel. But he only agreed to go onto that panel if he could drag me along. Maybe as a scribe, because he didn't want to write, and he knew that I would be happy to write up whatever we needed to write up. But that one really stuck with me. And I've worked on a couple of other panels with him since then, having to do with liquefaction and stability issues. And it's been really an education for me, because what I saw was how he can explain things so simply that everyone there can understand it. But he can also immediately pick out the holes. And one of the things I learned from him in working with him is that it's not just getting an answer. It's not just getting an answer that is technically correct. It's getting an answer that considers what that answer means. It means, well, if this is right, then this must be happening too. If that's happening too, then that must be happening also. And he was really good at picking that kind of stuff out and making sure that we covered that. I also remember very early on a project we worked together when I was looking at something and I talked to him. I said, Dad, I'm really sorry. I do not understand this mathematics right here. And I said, can you help me with it? And he said, you really don't need to know that. Can you explain this phenomena? And I explained, and he goes, yeah, you've got it right. He said, it would be better, though, if you understood how the math worked. But it truly was a privilege working with him.
Thanks, Rick. I remember OII because with Ed and Jorge, we were all working together, and your dad was, and you were on the panel. And another project where he was a consultant, I asked him to join us, was this chromite ore processing residue project that Demetrios talked about, and we had a lot of fun with that, and we all learned a lot. I didn't know what Ettringite was when we started the project. In fact, as a consultant, a little sidebar, personal sidebar, someone said, you're going to get a call from Honeywell, who was the client. They want to know if you can help on this. And I went on the computer for 30 minutes and learned everything I could so that when they called, I could profess enough knowledge of the topic that they hired us. And so that's what consultants do sometimes. But when I think of Jim in all these meetings, I think of an old E.F. Hutton commercial. You have to be of a certain age to remember this, but when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. These were investment bankers. So when Jim Mitchell talked, people listened. Nick, one topic that was alluded to a few times today was Jim's contributions to the NASA Apollo lunar program, and more broadly, lunar and planetary sciences, the soil mechanics part of that. I know you have some perspectives on that. Could you share that with us?
Well, you know, some of you actually may know more, but what really happened, he was the chair of the Soil Properties Committee of ASCE when this issue of should ASCE be involved. And that's how he got involved as a chair of the ASCE Soil Properties Committee in this work. And just like anything else, he embraced it fully without any hesitation. And later on, when he left for Virginia Tech and we were going through all the boxes of stuff that was left behind, what struck me is how deeply he was involved in this whole thing, because he had materials that you couldn't get just simply by asking. Somebody had to be willing to give you the detailed photographs and the notes from the astronauts speaking about, you know, the issues on cone penetration. And the cone penetration, really, his work was motivated by the work that he did on the moon, because that was the simplest way that one could, with light equipment that the astronauts could handle, get soil properties. So his insight into what was the easiest and yet the most robust tool that one could use for the job. So as a general contractor, he did very well for NASA coming up, you know, and it was the engineers at NASA, of course, worked with him to come up with a recording device and all of that. But that was also the genesis of his work on cone penetration, was this work on the moon. And as somebody mentioned, I'm sure he would have loved to continue that work on Mars. And I think it was really instrumental in pushing him into some of these directions that otherwise there wasn't that much interest in the geotechnical profession at the time in the cone. And he was one who kind of brought it into full, and then, of course, a lot of things followed. So I think it had profound influence on what he did, and I think on the profession.
Thank you, Nick. We're running out of time. I want to ask two more questions, fairly succinct responses, and then maybe just 2 or 3 minutes to see if there are folks in the audience. And this question, Jim, is a follow-on on Apollo. You had a Mitchell family visit in 1999 to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. to see the Apollo exhibit. Can you just share with us a little vignette from that?
Sure. My wife and I had met my mother and father in Washington, D.C. At the time, I was with Jacobs Engineering, and we were staying in Washington. They came up from Blacksburg. And so we went to Air and Space, and I had my 3 boys with me. And my dad we're at the Apollo exhibits, and my dad asked, I think our oldest son, Christopher, he says, "Christopher, do you see anything in this exhibit that you've seen before?" And he says, "Grandpa, one of those." And he goes, "That's right. There's 3 of those. One on the moon, one at Air and Space, and one on my bookcase." Well, I have one of those now on my bookcase. But the thing about it was he starts to explain what was going on. Next thing you know, you thought he was the tour guide at Air and Space talking about, and there's probably 20 or 30 people standing around listening to a lecture on the Apollo missions. But everybody glued to everything that he was saying. And after he passed away, I now have his binders from the Apollo mission with all his badges, all his patches, everything about the missions that he did, we have now saved. And as recently as last week, when I was in Salt Lake City with the Austin Rail Project, one of the guys from EY was asking me questions about my father and everything like that. And I said, "Oh, well, I've got stuff that went to the moon and back." So I actually took pictures and showed it to him this week before I came here. So yeah, he was really, really instrumental. And as an elementary school kid, when Apollo 11 was going on, he would bring the movies, the black and white movies, to the school in Moraga, and it was like everybody got to watch it. I can remember coming to Berkeley, and he had to keep moon dust in a vault before they would let you, so we'd go to his office and he'd open it up and go, so there's moon dust. But yeah, it was pretty special that he was able to just command an audience like that.
Thank you, Jim. I have a bunch more questions, but this is the last one for the panel. Don, it's for you. You are yourself an accomplished academician in the field of human geography. What did you learn from your father about being a professor, and did you use his academic career as any kind of model for yours?
What didn't I learn, I guess is the better question. I learned a lot of things from him, and you've heard a lot of them today. I learned how to treat students that I work with in the way that I would want to be treated, which is, I think, how he treated his students. I learned the importance of really thinking about why things, as we've heard today, why things happen the way they do, and what it means that they happen in the way they do, and finding ways to convey that in clear language, and which is very, very important for teaching, of course. So there are all of those sorts of things, but there are a number of other things that were also important. There have been any number of studies that show that the academic class reproduces itself, right? And it does. And so people who are children of academics often become academics. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And one is that, the academic world is made totally familiar. It's not a strange world. So we have a leg up in that world. But the way that Dad showed me that academic world wasn't just that here's this place of privilege, here's this place that you too could be part of, but here's a place where if you work and you apply yourself and you think, you can actually do some things that are going to make some people think differently. And that's why it's important to be in this kind of a business, and that's where the real joy comes from. So there's those kinds of things that he taught me. But there's one thing that really sticks out. Just as I was finishing my Ph.D., defending my dissertation at Rutgers University, I got a position, a 2-year temporary position in instructorship at the University of Colorado in the Department of Geography. And so I was very excited, of course. And I called up my parents, and I was talking with Dad, and I said, so Dad, now that I'm done with my dissertation, I'm about to start in an academic position, what are the most important things to know? And since it's a temporary job, there's a kind of a dangling promise of maybe it becoming a tenure track job. What do I do to increase my chances? And he said, well, look around the department, figure out who the most important people are, and treat them very, very, very well. And there was something in his tone of voice, and I think some of you have probably heard this before. And I'm thinking, okay, the department head, maybe the superstar professor, all those sorts of things. But I could tell there's something else, and it said, so just who are you thinking about? And he said, the office staff. The office staff. Right? They are the ones who are going to make or break your career for you. If you do not treat them well, they'll have no reason to treat you well, and things will not go well in your career. If you treat them well, they'll treat you wonderfully, and things will go very, very well for you. And those of you who are at Berkeley know how he felt about the office staff, about Nancy Hose. I don't remember the names of all the others. Who were they were gatekeepers, even to us kids, right? If we wanted to get in to see them, we had to get through them first. But he deeply respected them, right? He didn't just treat them well. He deeply, deeply respected them. And to me, that was one of the most important lessons, right? The office staff are deeply professional. They are very, very important parts of the academic world, and Dad knew it. And he made sure that I knew it. And to me, it was like one of the most important things that he taught me. It was just how important that was to understand the professional work that goes on in all kinds of other ways in a university than just the professors, the graduate students, and so forth. And so that's a lesson that has stuck with me. I don't always live up to it. I don't always treat my students in the ways that I really ought to treat them. We all fail on these things. And whenever I do, I can feel him behind me, wondering what the hell am I doing? And I try and correct myself.
Thank you, Don.
May I add? And what you just said is incredibly important. And Nancy Hose, and now Nancy Moran, would have walked through fire to help your father, and also Harry Seed. She would have done absolutely anything because she was always treated with utmost respect, and she learned so much from them. So it was mutual and very important. Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. And Don, that last point you made, I think, is universally applicable, whether you're in academia, business world, whatever you're doing in life. Treating people with respect and dignity, and having it be genuine is a really great value to have. Sadly, we've run out of time. Dinner, I think, is waiting. You all have sat through a long day. Thank you for sitting through this last session. Thank you to all of our panelists.